A deep, otherworldly hum fills the vast chamber, a harmonic resonance of technology far beyond human comprehension. Towering crystalline spires stretch toward a ceiling that is neither solid nor fluid but a shifting canvas of starlight and swirling cosmic energy. The walls pulse with iridescent hues, casting refracted patterns of light across the gathered council members, an array of alien beings, each more exotic than the next. Suspended in the air, translucent data streams weave intricate geometric symbols, updating in real time as the council deliberates. The Galactic Diplomatic Chamber, an eternal monument to interstellar unity. Here, the most enlightened civilizations of the cosmos convene, their minds linked in a symphony of logic and wisdom. They have seen the birth and demise of stars, deciphered the whispers of the void, and harnessed the fabric of existence itself. And yet, today, their topic of discussion was humanity, a young, volatile species that had only just begun to stretch its reach into the stars. Chittering laughter echoes through the chamber, a medley of clicks, reverberations, and harmonic trills. Bioluminescent scales shimmer in amusement, feathery crests ruffle in derision, tentacles writhe in a synchronized display of condescending amusement. Ambassador Sreel, his translucent form shifting like liquid glass. And now, we shall address the matter of humans. A silence follows, not one of reverence, but of restrained mirth. The word humans is spoken as one might refer to an unintelligent pet, curious, amusing, but ultimately insignificant. Council member Pixes, fluttering her sleek, iridescent wings. Did you know? They still use projectile weapons. Physical projectiles. Can you imagine? A holographic display hums to life, its crystalline facets unfolding like a blooming flower of light. The council watches as crude human weaponry materializes, rusted cannons belching fire, clunky metal ships struggling through the void, atomic mushrooms devouring landscapes in violent, uncontrolled chaos. Ambassador Atril, a towering insectoid with compound eyes reflecting 1,000 shifting perspectives, taps his mandibles together, a gesture akin to a smirk. Ambassador Atril, they take such pride in nuclear fission. Should we inform them that we used that for cooking food 10,000 years ago? A ripple of laughter spreads through the chamber like a gust of wind stirring leaves. More holograms flicker into existence, displaying the Galactic Council's elegant energy-based weaponry, silent beams of precise devastation. Technology that does not obliterate, but instead neutralizes, subdues, incapacitates. Ambassador Kree, chittering, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. Truly, it is endearing. Their fascination with destruction, their childlike wonder at concepts we discarded eons ago. Perhaps, in time, they will evolve beyond their barbarism. The laughter grows, an almost musical cacophony of alien voices, each species finding its own humor in humanity's primitive nature. Then, suddenly, a sound, a presence. The great crystalline doors to the chamber glide apart with a soft hiss, releasing a gust of artificially controlled air. The laughter dies instantly. The very atmosphere of the room seems to shift, a tension creeping through the assembly like the first crackle of an oncoming storm. Footsteps echo against the luminous floor. Slow, measured, purposeful, each step lands with an unshaken certainty, a contrast to the ethereal lightness of the chamber's usual inhabitants. A lone figure strides into the room. His form is unlike theirs, denser, more angular. No graceful bioluminescence, no shimmering exoskeleton, just solid, unyielding flesh, wrapped in dark fabric adorned with insignias of authority. His uniform, though well-tailored, carries an air of practicality. His boots, polished yet battle-worn, click against the smooth surface beneath him like a rhythmic drumbeat of inevitability. A metallic plate is affixed to his chest. It bears a simple, unassuming inscription: James Rodriguez, Human Military Liaison. For the first time since the discussion began, an unnatural stillness settles over the chamber. Though they do not breathe in the same way humans do, some among them feel an inexplicable sensation, like an instinct buried deep in their genetic memory. Whispering of something unfamiliar, unpredictable, the man stops at the center of the room. He does not bow, he does not hesitate, he merely stands, not as a supplicant before a council of superior beings, but as something else entirely, as if he is the only real weight in a room full of shifting phantoms. Then, he smiles. Not the tight-lipped, diplomatic smile they are accustomed to. Not the polite expressions of submission their kind usually offer. No, this is something different. A smile that does not plead for approval, nor acknowledge inferiority. A smile that carries with it something unsettlingly human, a glimmer of humor. Laced with something deeper, something ancient, something that does not belong in a room of logical, calculated minds. A smile that, for reasons the Council cannot yet comprehend, makes some of them suddenly feel very, very cold. James Rodriguez, his voice carrying a casual ease, yet each word laced with an undercurrent of something unreadable. Thank you, Ambassador. Always enlightening to hear our allies' perspective on human capabilities. A long pause, an almost imperceptible shift in the chamber's atmosphere. A small, feathered alien flutters closer, her head tilting in bird-like curiosity. Council member Pixis, you served in your planet's military. Yes? Fascinating. Tell us, what was it like using such traditional weapons? Ambassadors lean forward, intrigued, expecting tales of crude battle strategies, of primitive combat inferior to their own enlightened methods. James's smile widens, just slightly. A minuscule shift in expression. But it is enough. Ambassador Shrell's translucent tendrils, once swaying in amusement, now coil ever so slightly inward. James's eyes sweep across the room. He exhales, as if suppressing the urge to chuckle at some great, hidden joke. James Rodriguez. Oh, I could tell you, but you see, the interesting part isn't how we fight. Another pause. Silence, so thick it is almost suffocating. The interesting part is why we had to make rules for it. The chamber, once a beacon of interstellar unity, where wars were nothing more than echoes of an obsolete past, grows unnaturally quiet. And in that moment, the universe did not yet know it, but it had just taken its first step into understanding the nature of humanity. Not the species of quaint technological infancy they had believed them to be, but the species that had spent its entire existence perfecting the art of warfare. And the species that, unlike any other, had to teach itself how to hold back. A silence, thick, expectant, settles over the chamber. The air, previously filled with the smug murmurs of interstellar diplomats, now seems to hold its breath. The polished crystalline floor, reflective like the surface of a still lake, distorts slightly as an unfamiliar presence steps forward. Slow, deliberate footsteps echo, sharp, rhythmic, unhurried. The sound does not belong in this place, where movement is often weightless, fluid, effortless. These steps command attention. They land with a certainty that feels out of place. The figure is clad in dark, immaculate fabric, tailored for both formality and function. Gold-trimmed insignias adorn the uniform's shoulders, small and understated but unmistakable in their authority. A single metallic plate is affixed to his chest, inscribed with a name that, until now, had been little more than a curiosity among the gathered species. James Rodriguez, a lone human, stepping into a hall of ancient intellects, a species barely a footnote in the annals of galactic history. Yet, as he moves forward, there is something in his demeanor, something that does not fit within the Council's understanding. His posture is relaxed, yet purposeful, not the cautious hesitance of a lesser species in the presence of superior minds. Not the eager reverence of a civilization standing before its betters. No, his movements speak of something else entirely. A quiet certainty. Ambassador Sreel, ever the image of composed amusement, inclines his translucent head. His tendrils undulate in what many species recognize as a gesture of condescending warmth. Ambassador Sreel, the human representative arrives. We were just discussing your species' technological achievements. Most impressive for your developmental stage. The words are carefully measured, designed to acknowledge while simultaneously dismissing. The way one might praise the artistic endeavors of a child, encouraging, yet meaningless in the grand scheme of things. But then, something unexpected. A response not calculated, not rehearsed, not the expected deference of a young species eager to prove itself. James smiles, not the polite, practiced curve of the lips that the Council has come to expect from human diplomats. Not the rehearsed charm of an envoy seeking favor. No, this smile is something else. Something different, a slow, knowing grin that flickers across his face like the first whisper of an impending storm. There is amusement in it, yes, but something deeper, something that carries weight, as though he is in on a joke no one else in the room understands. A ripple moves through the chamber, not seen, but felt, a sensation so foreign, so utterly unexpected, that even those without eyes to see or ears to hear experience it. A shift in the atmosphere, an unfamiliar unease slithering into the periphery of perception. James Rodriguez, his tone light, almost conversational. Thank you, Ambassador. Always enlightening to hear our allies' perspective on human capabilities. The words, harmless at first glance, settle uneasily in the air. There is no challenge in them, no direct confrontation, just a casual acknowledgement. But the way he says it, the way he smiles, something is wrong. Pixis, a diplomat of avian descent, flutters forward, her feathers shimmering in curiosity. Her kind is known for their insatiable thirst for knowledge, for their delight in dissecting the behaviors of lesser species. She observes the human closely, her head tilting at an inquisitive angle. Council member Pixis, you served in your planet's military. Yes? Fascinating. Tell us, what was it like using such traditional weapons? She means no offense, of course. To her, it is a genuine question, an academic pursuit, a chance to hear firsthand about the quaint, outdated ways of a species still bound by the limitations of physical weaponry. The question lingers in the air, light-hearted, inviting. James's grin widens just a fraction. Not much, just enough. Ambassador Shrell's tendrils pause in their idle, amused motions. Ambassador Kree's mandibles, once loosely tapping in relaxed rhythm, still. Ambassador Exerl's compound eyes flicker through a spectrum of unreadable colors. James Rodriguez, his voice remains light. But there is something new beneath it, something weighted, something measured. Oh, ma'am, I served in the Marine Corps for 15 years. Saw action in 3 different campaigns. But you know what's interesting? He pauses, a fraction of a second. Just enough time for awareness to settle in. The chamber grows quieter. The ever-present background murmurs of alien dialects, static noise in any gathering of this scale, begin to fade. The shifting light of the crystalline ceiling seems to dim, as though something unseen has drawn a veil over the vibrant hues. James tilts his head ever so slightly, letting his gaze sweep across the gathered council members. The weight of his words is not in what he says, but in how he says it, the deliberate way he lets the silence stretch, lets the anticipation coil like a snake waiting to strike. James Rodriguez, his voice even, yet somehow heavier than before. None of you have asked why we have so many rules about how we fight wars. The room changes. There is no visible shift, no sudden alarm, no obvious reaction, and yet, something is different, wrong. It starts small, a flick of a tendril, the tightening of a mandible, the stiffening of an otherwise fluid movement. The kind of reaction so deeply ingrained in one's instincts that it manifests before the mind even understands why. The air is no colder, yet some among them feel a chill creep along their limbs. The room is no darker, yet shadows seem to stretch just a little farther. The silence is no deeper, yet suddenly, it feels like the universe itself is holding its breath. James knows. He sees the shift, he feels it, and for the first time since entering the chamber, his grin vanishes, replaced by something far more unsettling. He is no longer smiling. Instead, he simply watches, listens, waits. The chamber, once a sanctuary of enlightened superiority, now feels small, and the diplomats, ancient, powerful beings who had long since ceased fearing anything, now realize they may have overlooked something. Something that had been right in front of them the whole time. In that moment, for the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, an unfamiliar sensation gripped the chamber. A concept so foreign, so impossible, that it had not been felt for thousands of years. Dread. The light within the chamber shifts. Subtly at first, almost imperceptible. The great crystalline structures, once glowing with ethereal radiance, seem to dim, as though retreating from an unseen force. The holographic displays flicker erratically, colors distorting, shapes distending momentarily before stabilizing. The ambient hum of the chamber, ever present and comforting, lowers in pitch, becoming something deeper, more resonant, almost heavy. It is not a malfunction. It is not an error in the system. It is something else, something that has not been present in this chamber for centuries, an instinct long buried beneath the layers of rationality and progress. A presence that, without warning, has reshaped the very fabric of the room. Antennas twitch, feathers flatten, scaled hides ripple as though touched by an unseen wind. The once jovial murmurs fade into uneasy silence, replaced by a tension that coils through the chamber like a slow-moving storm. Ambassador 6, a being of cold logic and calculated diplomacy, breaks the silence. His voice is steady, but there is something beneath it, something not quite concealed. Ambassador 6, with forced amusement. Rules for warfare? What an odd concept. Why would one require rules for such a primitive form of conflict resolution? The words, meant to be dismissive, do not land as they should. They hover in the air, unanswered, for a fraction of a second too long. Then, movement, subtle, but deliberate. James Rodriguez shifts his weight, leaning against the central platform. His posture is relaxed, effortless, yet it carries with it a peculiar certainty, a presence that is neither boastful nor defensive. But something else entirely, something that should not belong here. In this chamber of enlightened minds, the way he leans, too casual, too at ease, creates an unsettling contrast. It is the posture of a man in a room full of people who believe they hold power. A man who knows something they do not. And then, he speaks. James Rodriguez, voice calm, almost amused. Funny story about that, you see. We kept coming up with too many creative ways to kill each other. We had to draw the line somewhere. Abruptly, silence. True, absolute silence. It is unnatural. This chamber, a place of eternal discourse, has never known such stillness. Even in moments of deep contemplation, there is always something. Whispers of data streams, the rhythmic pulsing of organic bodies, the murmurs of countless minds at work. But now, nothing. The diplomats, many of whom have witnessed cosmic phenomena beyond human comprehension, sit frozen in place. The words linger in the air, stretching, unraveling something deep in their consciousness. Ambassador Shrell's translucent tentacles, once undulating with idle amusement, cease all movement. They become eerily still, their shifting hues dimming into a muted, lifeless transparency. Ambassador Kree, his many-jointed limbs flexing with involuntary tension, finally speaks. His voice, which once carried the smug certainty of the superior, now wavers, just slightly. But it is enough. Ambassador Kree, hesitantly. Creative ways? There it is, the first crack, a splinter in the carefully constructed perception of humanity's supposed primitiveness. The illusion of control, of understanding, begins to fracture. James does not move, he does not raise his voice, nor change his expression. He simply watches, his gaze steady, unwavering, as though measuring something unseen. Then, he smiles. But this time, it is different, not the playful smirk, nor the knowing grin from before. This smile is smaller, sharper, a hint of something deeper beneath it, something patient. James Rodriguez, softly, yet somehow heavier than before. Oh, yeah, a beat. The silence deepens. The holograms, still displaying their pristine images of galactic weaponry, elegant energy-based weapons, sophisticated non-lethal deterrents, feel insignificant now. Trivial. James Rodriguez. In fact, if you're interested, I'd love to explain why we had to specifically ban certain weapons and tactics. It's quite the history lesson. The air thickens. It is a sensation not dictated by science or logic but by something far older, something primal. An awareness that transcends species. A recognition that is not learned, but simply known. The Galactic Council, for all its wisdom, for all its millennia of understanding, suddenly realizes something horrifying. They are not in the presence of a primitive species still fumbling in the dark. They are in the presence of something else. Something that has already walked through darkness. Something that has mastered it. And something that, should it ever be necessary, would not hesitate to bring it forth again. The silence remains, stretching out across the chamber. And James waits. The holographic screens shudder for a moment before stabilizing. Their once pristine displays now shifting, twisting, and reforming. What had once been clean, elegant depictions of energy-based weapons, silent, precise, surgical, now flicker into something else. The images are darker now. Blurred landscapes, scorched earth, the remnants of places that had once thrived. Cities, if they could still be called that, frozen in time at the moment of their destruction. Streets warped into molten rivers of slag. Buildings reduced to skeletal husks. Their metal frames twisted like grotesque monuments to something unspoken. And then, with a snap, the images clear. Ambassador Kree flinches. He does not know why. Only that something in his deeply rooted instincts, the instincts of a species that had long since abandoned such violence, reacts violently to the sight before him. A silence stretches through the chamber. Thick, suffocating. It is the kind of silence that exists in the space between a held breath and a scream. James, standing casually before the gathered diplomats, lets the moment hang. He does not need to rush. He knows the effect this is having. He knows exactly what they are feeling. And then, with the ease of someone discussing the weather, he speaks. James Rodriguez, lightly, as though recalling an old memory. Let's start with something simple. You folks ever hear of white phosphorus? No? Oh, it's fascinating. Burns so hot it keeps going even underwater. We had to ban its creative applications in war. The holograms shift. The images sharpen. The colors becoming impossibly vivid. The assembled council members watch, trapped, as the screens show white-hot tendrils of flame crawling across the earth, consuming everything in their path. They do not flicker like fire. They do not burn like a simple chemical reaction. They cling. They burrow. They devour. Ambassador Shrell's translucent form flickers. An involuntary reaction he has not experienced in centuries. Ambassador Kree, mandibles clicking unevenly. That cannot be real. Surely, you. James Rodriguez, tilting his head slightly. Oh, it's very real, and it's not even the worst one. With a single tap of his fingers against the control panel, the holograms shift again. The landscapes change. The fire vanishes, replaced by something worse. Cities, vast, sprawling megastructures, shown from above. The view is almost serene at first. Streets lined with lights. Buildings standing tall. Life, frozen in time. Then, movement, a shadow streaking through the sky. The perspective remains distant, impersonal. There is no sound, no warning, just a brief flash of light, so brief, so insignificant, that it could be mistaken for a trick of the eye. And then, the city disappears. Not destroyed, not burned, just gone. One moment, a civilization exists. The next, it is dust and ruin. The streets, turned to ash. The buildings, crushed beneath the weight of their own collapsing structures. The air itself seems to vibrate, even in this silent display, as though something immensely powerful has just passed through it, leaving behind only the imprint of absence. James watches the gathered diplomats, taking in their reactions, the stiffening of exoskeletons, the darkening of bioluminescent markings, the way their bodies instinctively shift away from the screen, as though that will change the truth of what they are seeing. James Rodriguez, his voice softer, but no less unnerving. And then there's carpet bombing. Ever seen a city wiped off the map in a single night? Fun fact. We had to invent new treaties because of that. The murmurs of the council, once a steady undercurrent of chatter and quiet amusement, have ceased entirely. There is no laughter now, no condescending remarks about primitive technology. There is only a realization, a slow, creeping awareness that seeps into the room like cold water through fractured stone. Ambassador Kill, ever the voice of reason, forces himself to speak. His voice is measured, but there is an edge to it, a thin, fragile thread of unease. Ambassador Kill, hesitantly, but surely, your weapons are becoming more refined, less destructive? For the first time since entering the chamber, James laughs. It is not cruel, not mocking, but there is something in it, something that does not belong in this place. He exhales, shaking his head slightly, as though genuinely amused by the statement. James Rodriguez, with an easy shrug. Oh, you mean our precision weapons? Yeah, we got those. Ambassador Kill's posture loosens, ever so slightly. A mistake. James Rodriguez, his smile returning. Sharper now. But then we thought. Why not use sound waves to liquefy internal organs instead? A sharp gasp, a sound not meant for the chamber. The kind of sound that emerges when something deeply wrong has just been understood. The screens shift again, showing no fire, no explosions, just vibrations. Waves of force that move unseen, passing through solid walls, through flesh, through bone, and then, the figures collapse. No wounds, no burns, no external signs of injury. And yet, they do not move again. One of the younger diplomats, a species evolved beyond the need for respiration, still finds itself gasping for air. James Rodriguez, continuing, as if listing off mundane facts. Or create explosives so powerful they vacuum the air from your lungs before you even hear the blast. The chamber is no longer silent. It is filled with something worse, a stillness that is too aware, too present, a moment stretched so thin it might break under its own weight. A single diplomat trembles, another steps back. The gesture is small, barely perceptible, but it speaks volumes. James Rodriguez, leaning forward slightly. Oh, and let's not forget kinetic bombardment. You know what happens when you drop a giant tungsten rod from orbit? No explosives needed, just pure gravitational force. The images shift again, displaying an immense, monolithic rod streaking toward a planet's surface. There is no explosion, just impact. And then, where there was once land, there is nothing. Ambassador Sriel, who had once spoken with condescension and amusement, is now silent. His tentacles have turned gray. Ambassador Kree, quietly, almost pleading. But, your species claims to be peaceful. James straightens, rolling his shoulders slightly, as if considering the statement. Then, with a voice that carries no threat, no warning, only certainty, he responds. James Rodriguez. Oh, we are, very peaceful. He lets the words linger, lets them settle into the spaces between heartbeats. And then, we just like to make sure we have options. Just in case. The room does not move. The air does not shift. The universe itself, in this moment, seems to hold its breath. The Galactic Council had feared human aggression, feared their primitive violence. They had been wrong. What they should have feared, what they now understood, was not humanity's violence. It was their restraint. At first, there is nothing. A silence, profound, suffocating, holds the chamber in its grip. It is not the quiet of deep thought, nor the stillness of contemplative minds. It is the kind of silence that follows the realization of something horribly wrong. A moment in which the air itself becomes heavy, where light seems to dim, where the concept of certainty begins to fray at the edges. Then, chaos. The once solemn chamber erupts into a cacophony of movement and sound. A ripple of unease surges through the alien diplomats, manifesting in different ways. Some species flicker their bioluminescent markings in erratic patterns. Others chitter in hushed, panicked tones. Feathery diplomats ruffle their plumes in disarray. Others, those of more calculating nature, move not with fear, but with purpose, already inputting new data into the galactic archives. Their limbs skimming across holographic interfaces with rapid, jerking motions. The systems react in kind. The floating holographic displays, once idle, decorative elements of intellectual discourse, flicker violently to life. Their luminescent glyphs now feeding an overwhelming flood of recalculations. Security protocols activate. Risk assessments, once marking humanity as a mere curiosity, begin shifting in real time. Probability of existential threat: 0.03%, 4.12%, 15.67%, 48.99%, escalating. Antennas quiver, mandibles clatter in nervous agitation. Several diplomats instinctively retract into their exoskeletal plating, their primitive fight or flight responses overriding logic. Others remain frozen in place, their bodies locked in unreadable stillness, failing, to process what they had just learned. Ambassador Sriel, ever the voice of reason, though his voice no longer carries the confidence it once did, forces himself to move. His tentacle, now noticeably paler than before, raises into the air, a motion that once commanded quiet without effort. Now, it struggles against the rising storm of fear. Ambassador Sriel, his voice cracking. Just slightly. Perhaps, we should take a recess. There is no protest, no dissent. The chamber, despite its rising panic, clings desperately to the illusion of control. It is the last shred of order they have left. Across the room, James Rodriguez watches. He does not interrupt. He does not rush to fill the silence that follows Shrell's proclamation. Instead, he waits, listens, observes the way the assembled diplomats fidget, how their hands, claws, tendrils, appendages, tighten with barely restrained tension. He sees how their eyes dart toward him, then away, as though staring for too long might invoke something worse. And then, finally, he speaks, but not in the way they expect. James exhales, a long, drawn-out sigh, the kind one makes when being denied a pleasure. Then, with a slow shake of his head, he smiles, a familiar expression, and yet, now, it is something entirely different. James Rodriguez, dramatically, his voice carrying the weight of exaggerated disappointment. Oh, already? But I haven't even explained how we weaponized the weather yet. The effect is instantaneous. A fresh wave of panic crashes over the chamber. The calculations, already unstable, spiral further into madness. Murmurs of urgent threat assessments ripple outward. Growing in volume, several diplomats turn to their aides, demanding immediate reports on meteorological disturbances in human-occupied territories. One particularly frail-looking official makes a choking sound, clutching their chest with trembling limbs. Ambassador Cree, struggling to regain composure, forces his mandibles to move. Ambassador Cree, desperately, his voice layered with poorly concealed dread. Weaponized, the weather? James tilts his head slightly, as if considering the question. James Rodriguez, with casual amusement. Oh yeah, see, turns out if you play around with the atmosphere just right, you can trigger all kinds of fun things, hurricanes, droughts, wildfires, even earthquakes if you get creative enough. Had to ban that too. The phrase "had to ban that too" lingers, festers, in the chamber's collective psyche. Ambassador Exerl's compound eyes, which had been shifting rapidly through a kaleidoscope of colors, suddenly freeze, locked into a single, unnatural shade. Several of the gathered diplomats turn, slowly, toward the nearest holographic interfaces. Their movements are stiff, mechanical, as though driven by a need to confirm what their minds are now refusing to accept. And then, as though in synchronization, they input the same command. Cross-reference, human meteorological history. There is a pause, a brief, agonizing pause. Then the displays flicker, scrolling through centuries of climate anomalies, of patterns that should not exist in a controlled environment, of cataclysmic events that coincided suspiciously well with human conflicts. Storms that emerged too suddenly, droughts that crippled civilizations at opportune moments, the whispers of geoengineering experiments buried beneath redacted government files. The data feeds surge, the information is too much, too overwhelming, and yet, one simple truth remains, undeniable, inescapable. It was never an accident. A cold realization settles over the chamber like a layer of frost creeping over glass. The thought spreads like a plague, an infection that takes root in the deepest, most primitive parts of their minds. They had thought war was humanity's greatest weapon. They were wrong. The weapon was humanity itself. James watches, waits, allows them to process, and then, just when the silence has reached its breaking point, he chuckles. The sound is light, almost innocent, and yet, it is not. James Rodriguez, with an air of mock reassurance. Oh, relax. We only used it a couple of times. Nothing major. The chamber, collectively, flinches. The illusion has shattered. The fabric of their understanding, once so firmly woven, now lays in ruins. They do not see a young, inexperienced species anymore. They do not see a race fumbling toward enlightenment. They see a species that had spent its entire existence at war, not with others, but with itself. A species that had perfected the art of destruction so thoroughly that they had been forced to create laws simply to contain their own capabilities. A species that, despite its outward friendliness, despite its smiles, still carried the weight of a history so profoundly violent that it had been forced to chain itself down. And the worst part? The part that terrified them the most? James had not even begun to explain the worst of it. The air in the chamber is thick now, suffocating. Some of the diplomats, unable to endure the weight of what they have learned, begin shutting down their translation devices, feigning reasons to leave. Others remain seated, but their expressions are blank, empty. Ambassador Sriel, his once pristine composure now fractured beyond repair, slowly, painfully, turns his gaze back to the human representative. His voice, when he finally speaks, is barely above a whisper. Ambassador Sriel, hoarse, broken. We may need a longer recess. James smiles again. James Rodriguez, cheerfully. Take your time. I'll be right here. The chamber empties. Faster than ever before. The chamber is different now. The great crystalline spires, once shimmering with elegant luminescence, seem duller, as if the very essence of the room has been drained of its former confidence. The vast holographic projections, which once floated with an effortless grace, now flicker intermittently, their usually pristine data streams tainted with uncertainty. The air carries a weight unspoken, an invisible tension that lingers like the fading echo of a warning never truly heard in time. The Galactic Council, the most advanced coalition of civilizations in the known universe, gathers once more, but this is no longer a meeting of scholars, no longer a place of enlightenment and measured diplomacy. No, this is something else, something far graver. The assembled ambassadors sit rigid, their forms betraying subtle signs of unrest, antennae twitching in irregular patterns, feathers flattened in distress, exoskeletal limbs curled ever so slightly inward. Even those whose species have long since evolved beyond the limitations of fear seem affected. Ambassador Kree, usually composed, now moves with an unnatural stiffness. His mandibles clack together, but this time, there is no air of superiority, no condescending amusement. There is only resolution, forced through a veneer of formality. Ambassador Kree, measured, yet tense. It is our recommendation that humanity's classification be significantly upgraded on the threat index. There is no objection, no debate, only silence, a silence so absolute that it seems to stretch beyond the room, beyond time itself. The words settle over the assembly like a sentence, like a realization that has only now fully solidified. Humanity is not merely a new species on the galactic stage. They are an anomaly, an impossibility, a paradox wrapped in flesh and war and laughter. A small, trembling movement draws attention. Pixis, her once proud plumage flattened, sits hunched within herself, a being of knowledge, of intellectual curiosity, now reduced to something hesitant, something lost. Pixis, soft, barely above a whisper. And what do we do about Rodriguez? The question hangs. No one wants to answer it. No one can. For a moment, even the chamber itself feels as though it is waiting, holding its breath for an answer that may never come. Then, reluctantly, Ambassador Sriel checks his notes. His movements are slow, mechanical, like a man reading the last words of an execution order, except this time, it is they who sit on the wrong side of fate. Ambassador Sriel, whose tendrils once danced with amusement, now barely move at all. Their usually vibrant hues have faded to a sickly pallor, as if the weight of knowledge alone has drained them of all color. And when he speaks, it is hollow, as though he himself cannot believe the words leaving his lips. Ambassador Sriel, quietly, almost detached. Following the incident, Human Diplomatic Command promoted him to Chief Liaison Officer. He received a medal. A ripple moves through the chamber. It is not shock. That would imply this was unexpected. No, this is something worse. This is the final confirmation of what they had all begun to fear. The humans do not punish those who terrify them. They reward them. Before anyone can process this revelation further, the doors hiss open. A shadow steps forward. One that should not, by all accounts, hold the power it does. Not here, not among beings who have outlived stars, who have charted the depths of creation itself. And yet, the moment James Rodriguez strides into the room, every instinct, every deeply embedded survival mechanism across countless species, screams to attention. But he does not march. He does not thunder into the chamber like a warlord claiming his prize. No, he whistles, a cheerful, carefree tune, lighthearted and casual, as though he is unaware of the devastation he has left in his wake. As though he does not see the way they shift, the way they pull ever so slightly away from him, despite themselves. He stops at the center of the chamber, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, and then, with a grin, James Rodriguez, bright, almost too friendly. "Hey folks, just wanted to let you know I've prepared a presentation on how we turned a soda factory into a munitions plant in under 48 hours. Silence, but not the same silence as before. This one is instantaneous, total. It is the silence of flight before the predator strikes. Then, motion, sudden, instinctive, desperate. The chamber empties. In an instant, a room filled with the most powerful beings in the known universe erupts into movement. Some leave with dignity, their heads high, their strides purposeful, but their pace is still too fast, betraying their intent. Others abandon decorum altogether, their bodies shifting, twisting, escaping through whatever means necessary. Those who cannot move simply shut down their interfaces, breaking the connection, withdrawing into the safety of distance. It is immediate, it is absolute, it is fear in its purest form. And standing at the center of it all, James Rodriguez laughs. Not cruelly, not mockingly, just genuinely amused. He watches as the greatest minds of the galaxy flee before him. He watches the chaos unfold. The way their carefully structured hierarchy shatters under nothing more than a smile and a few well-placed words. And then, as the last of them vanish, as the chamber doors slam shut, leaving him standing alone in a space now utterly abandoned, he exhales. His fingers tap idly against the sleek interface of his datapad. Then, with the ease of a man making casual conversation, he lifts his communicator, dialing back to Earth. A moment later, the line connects. James Rodriguez, lightly, as if he had just finished a morning briefing. "Mission accomplished, General. They've upgraded our classification from mostly harmless to extreme existential threat." A pause, a smirk. "Guess that means we get a bigger budget next year." Huh? The feed cuts. The Galactic Council, once the ruling force of the universe, will never be the same. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and for the first time, the universe realized just how dangerous their new neighbors truly were.